This week on Government Matters, a nonprofit honors the stars of federal government amid a government shutdown. We have a full report.
Like any big product launch, there are going to be some glitches.
Millions log on, but hiccups abound. The science behind Healthcaregov.
Trying to weed through government financial records are pretty difficult at this point.
The Data Act seeks to revolutionize federal spending. I sit down with Senator Mark Warner. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
Thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every Sunday, we'll bring you the week's top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. The government shutdown tops our headlines this Sunday. For the first time since 1996, Congress failed to pass even a temporary funding bill. So on Tuesday, many federal offices closed their doors. The impasse idled an estimated 800,000 federal workers, closed parks and museums, and put many government services on hold. Analysts worry the shutdown could last more than 2 weeks. A few more key points. Market research firm IHS Global Insight estimates the shutdown could cost $1.6 billion a week in lost economic output. Virginia Representatives Jim Moran and Frank Wolf introduced a retroactive pay bill on Monday. If signed by the president, furloughed feds will be entitled to back pay once the shutdown ends. The Washington Post reports the shutdown has also frozen the combined federal campaign. It's the world's largest annual workplace charity drive. Federal CIO Steve Van Rokel tells the Wall Street Journal he's worried hackers will take advantage of the shutdown and infiltrate U.S. systems. Amid the government shutdown, a celebration of 31 dedicated civil servants. The Service to America medals, or SAMMys, were presented on Thursday night. The winners include superbug code breakers, a top-flight energy saver, and a man who hunts down child predators. Roughly half of these federal employees were furloughed this week. Hatsavella reports.
He's constantly trying to outsmart them.
The objective of a criminal is not to get caught.
A problem that extends beyond our borders.
It's a problem everywhere in the world.
John McKinnon and his team out to save young lives every day.
We've been investigating the worst of the worst producers of child pornography, not only in the United States, but around the world.
He's part of the Homeland Security Investigations Team, who focuses on rescuing exploited child victims and finding sex predators.
Our teammates have developed advanced advanced technology techniques, and then some other things by exploiting weaknesses in the bad guys that other folks may not have thought of.
They study pictures and videos for clues, always keeping tabs on chat rooms and social media.
The challenges we face with the ease of moving contraband over the internet are very daunting.
They, of course, do not want to give up their secrets, but McKinnon says it's a mix of good old detective work and new ways of investigating crimes.
What motivates us is that we have vivid satisfaction in taking really bad people off the street and saving children at the same time.
McKinnon did not want to talk about the government shutdown or its effects on their work, but wasn't shy about addressing its importance.
It's vital that we're permitted to work as hard as we can to continue the fight.
Laura Shane of the Partnership for Public Service says the federal government has to do a better job at highlighting success stories like those of McKinnon and his team. Her nonprofit is dedicated to making government more effective.
It's right that people hear about failures. That's appropriate because we need to shine a light on them. That's the way a democracy works, so that we can fix them.
But she fears sequestration and now a shutdown are causing long-term harm to the federal government when it comes to attracting bright and innovative people like McKinnon.
Top talent has options to go to other places, and we are driving them out of government, and we are going to keep our young people from considering a career in public service.
Something Congress needs to think about when making such critical decisions. In Washington, Hatsavella for Government Matters.
A mix of 10 large and 2 small companies will share a $4 billion contract from the U.S. Army. Washington Technology reports they will supply the Army with communications and transmission services to help soldiers on the battlefield. The Army started developing this contract in 2010 and released RFPs 2 years later. Now some top names stepping down this week. Verizon announced the retirement of Susan Zeleniak, a 39-year veteran of the public telecom sector. Washington Technology reports Zeleniak led the company's cloud computing efforts. Michael Majorana will be Verizon's new Senior Vice President of the public sector. The Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA, announced a replacement for Rear Admiral David G. Simpson. Simpson will retire after a 31-year career in the Navy. He'll be replaced by former DISA Chief of Staff, Major General Alan Lynn. Army CIO Lieutenant General Susan Lawrence also announced her retirement this week. In a blog post, Lawrence touted the Army's progress on data center consolidation, network modernization, and email security. Her replacement was not announced. We'll turn from headlines to tech, straight ahead on Government Matters. Healthcaregov went live this week, but the rollout was no walk in the park. The science behind the Affordable Care Act, next. In Tech Matters, the infrastructure behind Healthcaregov. On Tuesday, the exchange went live for the first time, but not without its fair share of glitches. Are they simply growing pains or a sign of things to come? For the tech behind healthcare reform, we turn to our guest on Government Matters, David Amsler, President and CIO of Foreground Security. Dave, your company supports cybersecurity efforts for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, including systems and applications that support the Affordable Care Act. How does this work, and where does your company come in?
So obviously the Affordable Care Act and the exchange itself is one of the largest technology initiatives ever undertaken in any industry, anywhere. And if you look at it from a pure technology perspective, you're talking about something that really no one has ever tried to achieve before, where you're integrating systems at both the state level, at the federal level, private healthcare companies, individual insurance companies, and then the individual taxpayer, along with well over 10 different government agencies, and you're trying to integrate and pull data and allow access across all of that. And then you're trying to put that in a cloud environment, which no one's ever really tried to undertake something like that. And from Foreground's perspective, we were brought in to really be a major piece of designing the security and the monitoring and the detection from a cybersecurity perspective for that environment.
Healthcare.gov received a phenomenal amount of traffic this week, including 4.7 million unique visitors in the first week. The site also experienced glitches galore. Why? Are they related to the amount of traffic, and can they be fixed?
Certainly. I mean, if you think about any initiative the size that I just described, it would be unimaginable to think that everything is going to go smoothly right off the bat. Again, when you're having to coordinate systems and pulling of data from that many different government agencies and private industry companies. So given the amount of people who hit that website all at once the first day it opened, I think overall it was a success. Were there hiccups? Certainly. Most private companies that offer up a new large environment, they have the luxury of a lot of testing and beta versions and a soft launch, where this went live all at once.
I should say we're in the first week, but that was 4.7 million visitors the first 24 hours. Now let's talk about cybersecurity concerns. Last week, researcher Brian Krebs published an investigative report about an organization called SSNDOB. They hack data brokers and sell the info they capture to identity thieves. Gartner, a research firm, blogged about the possible implications. Quote, "It's another ominous and bad sign for Obamacare, since, as I understand it, the new healthcare insurance exchanges will be using the same KBA, knowledge-based authentication, to verify applicants." Dave, are those concerns misplaced? What steps are companies like yours taking to protect this type of information?
The concerns are always valid. We're talking about the essential databases of the most important information for all U.S. citizens, including myself. So I'm always concerned about that. Do we understand those concerns exist? Do we understand that that's going to be a major target? Absolutely. Are we doing things about that? Sure. Can I discuss what we're doing about that? No, I would never give a roadmap to our adversaries of how we're doing that, but we understand that is one of the concerns, one of. There are plenty of others.
The president said nobody gave up their Apple iPhones when they had some tech problems, so maybe we should get some people from Apple to help out with this, David. All right, good luck to you on that. Any other comments real quick?
No, thank you.
All right, David Amsler, President and CIO of Foreground Security. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
We'll turn from tech to security, straight ahead on Government Matters. Over the next several years, the U.S. defense industrial base will probably shrink. Are military leaders ready to embrace a fundamental change in priorities? We break down a new report next. In security matters, sustaining the U.S. defense industrial base. For the first 10 years of the 21st century, the DoD budget grew at a very fast rate. Since then, things have leveled off, and now they're actually shrinking. A new study argues it's time for the DoD to get more proactive. Joining me with more details on government matters is Barry Watts, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. Barry, in your report, you anticipate a protracted period of decline for the DoD budget. Why?
Not only are Pentagon budgets beginning to decline and going into one of those periodic valleys after the peak that was created by Afghanistan and Iraq, but the Pentagon is facing a new range of military threats, anti-access area denial capabilities from China, even Iran and the Persian Gulf. So the defense environment, the challenges are growing more complex, and budgets are likely to go down.
Now, in essence, this paper argues DoD officials should take a proactive, not a reactive approach to military priorities. Here's a quote. It is possible to develop a DIB strategy that proceeds from focusing first on what to keep in the long term rather than defaulting to a series of unrelated or arbitrary cuts in the short term to meet next year's budget constraints. That starts with priorities, or what you call core competencies. You identify 6 of them: precision strikes, nuclear capabilities, power projection, global commons, cyber warfare, and realistic training. What would that eliminate, Barry?
Well, it might not necessarily eliminate some of the capabilities that you see today, but it would certainly argue, if you were going to emphasize those areas, for preferential investment and special attention to those areas at the expense of others in the long term.
Now, if the military took such an approach, private contractors would certainly feel it. For many of these programs, there's no commercial market. Would this benefit the nation's largest contractors at the expense of small to mid-sized firms?
I don't think it would necessarily just benefit the large companies. Perhaps the important point to make would be that as you go down the supply chains that exist today on major programs, you see fewer and fewer contractors and suppliers further down the supply chains. And that's why the Pentagon's Office of Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy has been concerned to look for single points of failures in the supply chains. And trying to identify those in advance is what motivated our argument that today the Defense Department needs a coherent strategy for managing the defense industrial base. It's a strategic asset. In the past, going all the way back to the 1940s, we've not had a coherent strategy for focusing on what we want to keep as opposed to what we can let go or fund at lower levels.
It's a very good point. How about innovation? Will it suffer?
It's hard to say. There has been so much consolidation in the industry since the Cold War ended that I am inclined to think that innovation probably has suffered due to a lack of competition. You have just a very small number of major prime contractors today. But the most beneficial way of increasing innovation would probably be with new starts, and there are not many new major weapon system program starts these days.
That's true. Now, before you go, I'd like to talk about the military culture. Will the Pentagon embrace such a fundamental change in how it views budgeting?
It's hard for me to be optimistic. We have tried to focus on a very short list of key military competitions, and then the supporting areas or core competencies in the defense industrial base. In general, most of the services have much longer lists of things they care about, and getting down to a list of, say, less than 10 areas across the entire Defense Department has generally been resisted, certainly over the last decade.
Very enlightening information. Barry Watts, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. Good to have you with us, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. Reducing fraud, waste, and abuse. It's a common political tagline. But when it comes to federal spending, that's easier said than done. Will the Data Act help? My exclusive interview with Senator Mark Warner next. In Management Matters, the Data Act. It would usher in a new era of federal financing by shifting control of USAspending.gov from OMB to the Treasury and forcing agencies to structure spending data in a consistent way. All topics I discussed with Virginia Senator Mark Warner. You brought this bill before the Budget and Government Performance Task Force in mid-September. Where is this piece of legislation today?
Depending on the government shutdown, it's my hope that it'll be marked up next week in the Government Affairs Committee on the Senate. The bill is already passed in the House.
The Data Act targets problems with existing data reporting. What's wrong with the current system?
Well, in the Defense Department alone, for example, there are over 200 different financial reporting systems. What may be reported in one category as a grant is reported in another category as an expenditure. There's no common definitions. Anybody is like, I spent 20 years longer in business than I have in government. If you don't have a good accounting system, if you don't have financial transparency, then you end up in a mess.
The bill relies on a concept called metadata. Explain that for me as you understand it.
Metadata is the idea of there's lots and lots of data that's created. How do you take this metadata or big data, voluminous amounts of data, and actually parse through it with common standards and extract out so that taxpayers, journalists, congressmen, and senators can actually see how the government is spending our tax money, where it goes, where it starts at the federal government, may end up being transferred to the state, then down to an actual grant. Follow the money is basically, we've got all this data already collected in this big, massive metadata. How do we now bring it into a commonly usable form?
The bill would also move control of USAspending.gov from OMB to the Treasury. Why is that a necessary step?
Well, the Treasury has been working for some time on trying to start this common financial standards. I originally, when we first sponsored the bill a couple years back, thought it maybe should be even an independent entity. Then we looked at OMB, but it clearly seems to me, after looking at this, that Treasury is the right spot for this. Treasury has got the kind of the financial expertise, the ability to look at balancing of accounts, and it also means that we don't have to create a whole new government entity.
How would this bill impact the federal bidding process?
Well, I think what it would do in terms of the bidding process is it would make it clearer where the dollars are going. If you are a federal contractor and you're trying to see what your competition looks like, being able to follow the money from the federal government down to some sub-agency, down to perhaps a local government, then into the marketplace, if you can follow that, you can have a better idea of what your competition looks like. So I think this will be a helpful tool for those government contractors.
USAspending.gov has some pretty big holes in it. For example, $350 billion a year in federal workers' salaries. Would that Data Act close those gaps?
Data Act would hopefully close those kind of gaps at this point. I'm not saying Data Act is going to get it 100% right. This is always an iterative process when you're dealing with reporting systems and financial standards, but sure as heck we can do a lot better than we're doing right now.
The House version of this bill was introduced by Representative Darrell Issa, chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. In the past, some of your Democratic colleagues have accused Issa of using his chair as a political weapon. Are you concerned about this motivation for supporting the Data Act?
There are certain things I agree with Chairman Issa on, like clear transparency around financial standards. There's an awful lot I don't agree with him on. On the other hand, this Data Act, which has passed through the House, was passed bipartisan. So even those Democrats on his committee work with him on this item.
The term spending is front and center this week. Congress keeps lurching from budget crisis to budget crisis, while the Data Act, tax reform, and other measures sit on the sidelines. Are lawmakers going about this whole thing backwards?
I got to tell you, as a business guy, I sometimes think we are. I think it becomes almost issue du jour as opposed to What I've been the most frustrated in the 4 years I've been here, how do we get our nation's balance sheet right? How do we end up doing the kind of tax reform that'll generate some more revenues, entitlement reform that will slowly start to bring those costs down, so that we don't leave our kids with this $17 trillion in debt? And if we're going to do that kind of realignment, which I believe will actually be a jobs program, because they'll get a lot of money off the sidelines, investing back into the marketplace, investing back into companies, businesses will actually hire if we don't lurch from budget crisis to budget crisis. If we're going to do that, you've got to have good data. You've got to have financially transparent data, and you've got to have the government itself, this goes back to my GIPRA law, actually start to help identify which programs are performing well, which programs aren't performing as well.
Senator Mark Warner, thank you.
Thank you, Morris.
We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. A new local publicly traded company rang the opening bell on Wall Street this week. Leidos, an offshoot of defense contractor SAIC, is officially standing on its own 2 feet. Leidos will specialize in technology services. SAIC will maintain its defense contracts. Last year, SAIC did more than $2 billion in business with the DoD. Well, thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. Your week is filled with other matters. Safe Sundays for us.